They say some secrets are meant to die with you. But what happens when one of those secrets refuses to stay buried? What happens when it falls into the hands of the future King of England and threatens to unearth a royal truth that was never meant to be known? Picture this: a red envelope, thick, heavily sealed, hidden in the back of a drawer beneath decades-old letters, holiday cards, and faded photographs. Its cover? Handwritten in careful cursive, "Things I will never speak about." Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That envelope was found in Sarah Ferguson's country estate. And now, Prince William has read every word. But here's the twist. Sarah never meant for anyone, not even her daughters, to see it. Especially not William. So how did it get into his hands? And why has it sent him into a fury that royal aides are struggling to contain? Because inside that envelope is a string of confessions. Not rumors, not speculation, but deeply personal, brutally honest revelations, written by someone who's been on the inside for decades, who has seen what the public never will, who stood beside Diana during her darkest hours, who was there when Charles whispered regrets no one else ever heard, and who witnessed a version of William and Harry's childhood that's far more complex and heartbreaking than the sanitized documentaries ever showed. So let me ask you, what if everything we thought we knew about the House of Windsor, about its marriages, its breakdowns, its scandals, its silences, was only half the story? And what if that red envelope held the rest? Because in this video, we're not just talking about royal gossip. We're peeling back the polished curtain to reveal a dynasty caught in a web of love, betrayal, and secrets so raw, they were almost lost forever. And it all started with a single phone call, a quiet day, a routine audit, and a housekeeper who stumbled on something strange in the study drawer. No royal insignia, no envelope from Buckingham Palace, just a faded wax seal and a note clipped to the front. "Do not open unless I am gone." But here's the thing, Sarah Ferguson is still very much alive. And that's what makes this discovery so dangerous. Because she wrote those words when she thought her time was running out. After her breast cancer diagnosis, after a double mastectomy, at a moment when she feared the truth might die with her. Except now, it didn't. Now William has it. And according to sources close to the situation, he's livid. But why? That's the million-pound question. Why would a man like William, famously composed, trained from birth to control his temper, rarely showing cracks in public, suddenly go silent, cancel an appearance, and disappear from the public eye for 48 hours after reading this file? What was in those pages? Let's talk about it. Because what started as a quiet estate check has turned into one of the most explosive royal unravelings of the decade. Insiders are calling it the Ferguson Files. But for William, it's personal. Now, here's where the story gets even murkier. The person who actually discovered the file wasn't even looking for it. Sources say it began as a routine inventory. Sarah's team was working with a preservation expert to catalog her collection of letters, family photos, and historical memorabilia. Nothing unusual. In fact, this kind of activity is quite normal for senior royals or extended family with generational estates. Until they opened that one drawer and found a false bottom. It wasn't obvious. The lining looked solid. But when gently pressed, it gave way, revealing a shallow hidden compartment. Inside, several documents wrapped in a silk scarf. That's where they found the envelope, along with a handful of tapes and a journal, all dated between 1993 and 2001, the years after Sarah's divorce from Prince Andrew, the years when she was officially out, but still deeply connected, still attending private events, still speaking with Diana, still being whispered to by Charles, and still watching William and Harry try to make sense of a royal family that had just shattered. The file was rushed to a senior royal archivist. Standard protocol. But something strange happened. The archivist, a palace loyalist, flagged it for sensitive content. He alerted higher-ups. And within hours, the entire bundle was personally couriered to Kensington Palace, for William's eyes only. You heard that right. Not King Charles. Not Princess Anne. Not the Queen Consort. Straight to William. Why? Because of the envelope's final line. "If something ever happens to me, give this to William." Sarah Ferguson had written that line nearly 20 years ago, at a time when William was barely into adulthood, when Harry was still in uniform, when Diana was gone, Charles was remarrying, and the monarchy was quietly recalibrating behind the scenes. But Sarah, she wasn't done speaking. Not yet. She had stories to tell, and she wrote them all down. Now let's pause for a second. Think about that. What would make a woman like Sarah Ferguson, a royal outsider, often mocked in the press, deeply scarred by scandal, decide to record her deepest memories on paper? And not just any memories, but ones she vowed never to say aloud. Was it guilt? Redemption? Or maybe a final act of protection? Whatever it was, she left behind something she knew could change how the public sees the royal family forever. And what William discovered in those pages was far worse than anyone expected. Not just old affairs. Not just whispers of Charles and Camilla's secret years, but raw, personal moments. Unspoken childhood traumas. Unfiltered grief. Backstage meltdowns. And stories so intense, so emotionally charged, that even Sarah herself seemed afraid to reread them. Because according to palace insiders, William wasn't just shocked. He was furious. He reportedly asked aides to verify the authenticity of the notes, to cross-reference the timelines, to speak with surviving staff from that era, and to determine if any of this could or should be made public. But here's where it gets even messier. Someone else knows about the files now. Someone who wasn't supposed to. There's a rumor that Harry got wind of the situation, that a source close to the Sussexes caught a whiff of what William was reading, and that a quiet request was made for copies. William refused. But that may have made things worse, because now the files are more than just family history. They're leverage. They're legacy. And they may just be the biggest royal bombshell since Diana's tapes. So what exactly is inside that envelope? And why is one of the pages missing? Because that's right, one page has vanished. A single sheet, torn clean from the middle of the file. No one knows who took it. No one knows what was on it. But sources claim it had a name at the top. And that name might be the very reason William wants this story buried permanently. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because the missing page? It wasn't some accident. It wasn't torn out by wind, lost in some messy drawer, or misfiled like a tax form from 1994. No, this was deliberate. Clean rip. Precision tear. Almost surgical. Someone took it, and someone wanted it gone. Now ask yourself, who would be so terrified of that page getting out? Who had access to Sarah's estate, the files, the people handling the archive, and more importantly, what was written on it that had the power to send a future king into a cold sweat? According to an insider familiar with the investigation, the missing page was the only one folded twice and marked in a different color ink. A deep navy blue, almost like it had been added later. Maybe even after Sarah thought she was finished confessing. A postscript. A final truth she couldn't bring herself to keep inside. And it had a name. Not Diana. Not Charles. Not Andrew. Not even Meghan. No, this was a name we haven't heard in the royal dramas. A name rarely uttered in public, but known inside palace walls. A name that, once exposed, could unravel the entire system of silent loyalties that holds the monarchy together. And when William read it, he didn't speak. Not at first. He walked to the edge of the room, holding the paper, his knuckles white. And then, according to someone who was present, he stared out the window for 5 full minutes. No blinking, no movement, just silence. And then, in a low voice, he said one word. Burn it. Now let that settle in. The future king of England demanding that something be destroyed. Not catalogued. Not preserved. Not evaluated by royal legal teams. Burned. Why? Because some truths are just too dangerous. But let's rewind for a second. This wasn't just any week in the royal calendar. William was already under immense pressure. Behind the smiles and wave-at-the-crowd optics, the House of Windsor has been dealing with internal fractures. His father, Charles, has been subtly shifting more power into William's hands. Camilla has reportedly taken on more control than expected, and Harry's media appearances, increasingly erratic and pointed, continue to land like daggers on palace tables. Now add this. Add a handwritten record of secrets, betrayals, and trauma from a woman who sat at the crossroads of every royal disaster for 3 decades? That's not an envelope. That's a grenade. And William? He just pulled the pin. But let's go deeper. Because some of you are probably wondering, why now? Why would Sarah even write all of this down in the first place? It wasn't fame. She's had that. It wasn't revenge. If it were, she would have gone public years ago when the tabloids tore her apart. No, this was something else. This was a reckoning. Sarah Ferguson was always the royal wild card. She married a prince, divorced a scandal, danced with debt, flirted with exile, and then somehow survived. She was the one who fell from grace, spectacularly, but never truly left the orbit of the crown. She's the one who sat with Diana when no one else would, who called Charles late at night just to tell him he looked tired on television, who shielded her daughters from palace politics even while being dragged through them herself. In other words, she was watching, and she remembered everything. So when her health scare came, that sudden cancer diagnosis, it jolted something loose. Mortality does that. You start asking yourself, what will I leave behind? And in Sarah's case, it wasn't jewels or titles. It was truth. Uncomfortable, unpolished, gut-wrenching truth. Because if there's one thing the palace hates more than scandal, it's honesty without filters. And Sarah's envelope had no filters. She wrote about Diana's private breakdowns, the ones after the Panorama interview. She wrote about Charles collapsing in a hallway after telling Camilla he couldn't bear another day of pretending. She wrote about a young William, age 11, screaming at a royal aide to get out when they tried to replace a photo of his mother with one of Camilla. She wrote about things no one has ever dared to say publicly. And now, Williams read every line. Imagine being in his shoes. You've spent your entire life being trained to hold it together, to serve, to smile, to shake hands, keep calm, carry on. You've rebuilt the royal image after your parents' chaos. You've tried to be the strong one while your brother went rogue. And then someone drops a letter in your lap that says, your family lied to you. Your childhood was a facade. And your future? It's built on a foundation of denial. What do you do with that? How do you breathe after reading that? Because this wasn't just a diary. It wasn't just memories. It was a mirror. And for the first time, William saw the cracks in his reflection. Now here's the real kicker. Sarah never meant for this to go to Harry. Not directly. She made it clear in her writings that she feared how Harry would react. That he might go nuclear. That he'd use it as fuel for his feud, weaponize it against the crown, maybe even leak it to the media. But she trusted William. That's what the final paragraph said. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you in person. But I know you. I've seen your heart. And I believe you will know what to do. It's no wonder he lost it. He trusted her too. And now, he's sitting on a ticking time bomb. But let's talk about the silence. Because after the files were delivered, something strange happened. William canceled 2 private meetings. He skipped a debrief with the Foreign Office. He even delayed a visit with Catherine and the kids at Amer Hall, something he never does. Where was he? Alone. Sources say he took a solo walk at Sandringham. No aides. No security tail. Just him, the wind, and the weight of his mother's ghost pressing on his chest. Because that's what this envelope really did. It brought Diana back. Not the curated image. Not the charitable smile. The real woman. The hurting mother. The furious wife. The broken soul who saw the crown chew up everything she loved. And William? He's realizing that he never truly knew her. Not until now. So what comes next? That's the question, isn't it? Does he bury it? Does he confront Charles? Does he reach out to Harry? Or does he do the unthinkable? Because there's a whisper, just a whisper, that someone inside the palace wants this file leaked. A controlled leak. Just enough to humanize the family. To preempt Harry's next memoir. To shift the narrative. But William? He's resisting. Because if the wrong page gets out, if the missing page falls into the wrong hands, it won't just rewrite royal history. It could burn it down. And that's why this isn't just another royal drama. This is war, psychological, emotional, generational. A war between silence and truth. Between duty and pain. Between the image the crown wants and the reality it buried. And at the heart of it all, a red envelope, hidden for years, opened too soon. And now, missing one page that could shatter everything. What's on that page? Who took it? And why does it scare William more than anything he's ever faced? The answer lies in the last line Sarah wrote before she signed the envelope shut. If they ever find this, they'll never forgive me. And she was right. Because someone hasn't. And they're already moving to make sure this story never sees the light of day. What if the secret that could upend the British royal family wasn't lost to time, but hidden in plain sight, behind a wooden panel and a rusted lock, untouched for nearly 2 decades? It all began with a sound. Not a scream, not a royal outburst, just a faint, almost imperceptible click. A warped floorboard, a dusty drawer, the hesitant creak of hinges opening for the first time in years. The kind of sound you only notice when the world is otherwise silent. And on that quiet afternoon in the Yorkshire countryside, within the aging corridors of Sarah Ferguson's private estate, a housekeeper named Margaret heard it. She hadn't meant to stumble upon it. She was simply doing what she'd done for over 30 years, tidying up before the Duchess's return, folding linens, dusting the bookshelves, checking the old study where the late Queen once sent handwritten letters addressed simply to Sarah. That room hadn't been used in a while. The Duchess had recently undergone major surgery. She was recovering, mostly in London, so the estate staff had strict instructions: preserve the place, keep it as is. But the old wooden cabinet in the corner had developed a sticky drawer. One of its legs wobbled. Margaret, being meticulous, decided to investigate. She tugged, gently, then again, harder. Suddenly, a thud, a hollow one, different from what wood on wood should sound like. She tapped. The bottom panel echoed. A false bottom. She reached for a small screwdriver, wedged it under the seam, lifted. That's when she saw it. A silk scarf, neatly folded, burgundy and gold, the Duchess of York's favorite colors, wrapped tightly around a bundle. As she unwrapped it, her heart thudded, not from fear, but from something else. Anticipation. Inside was an envelope, heavy, sealed with red wax. The cursive on the front, hauntingly elegant, read, "Things I will never speak about." She froze. Should she put it back? Call a supervisor? She did neither. Instead, she slipped it quietly into the satchel of documents scheduled to be sent to the archival consultant later that day, a team brought in by the palace to digitize old correspondence. Officially, this was a heritage project. Privately, it was about control. Anything that could be a liability had to be reviewed. Margaret didn't know it yet, but her decision would ignite a storm. The bundle arrived at the London Archive Lab 3 hours later. Two experts, Dr. Neville Simmons and his assistant Clive, began sorting the files. Most were harmless. Old birthday cards from Beatrice and Eugenie. Letters from Diana thanking Sarah for support. A charming note from Prince Philip poking fun at her insatiable optimism. But then, they found the envelope. At first, they assumed it was personal, private, something to be filed away, until Clive turned it over. On the back was a second inscription, scribbled in rushed ink. "If something happens to me, give this to William. Only William." Now pause. Take that in. This wasn't addressed to the Queen, not to Charles, not to Anne, the royal family's enforcer, not even to her own daughters. Sarah Ferguson, often dismissed as the scandal-ridden Duchess, the outsider, the one who wasn't royal enough, had written a personal confession meant for one man, the future king. Why? That's exactly what Clive asked. But Dr. Simmons said something stranger. "We're not the first ones to see this." "What do you mean?" Clive asked. "The wax seal, it's cracked. Someone's already opened it and resealed it." Now that changed everything. Within the hour, the archive team had flagged the file as ultra-sensitive. In royal speak, that meant code red. 2 palace couriers, in unmarked cars, were dispatched to retrieve the documents and deliver them directly to Kensington Palace. William was at Clarence House when he got the call. According to sources, he was reviewing a speech for an upcoming mental health initiative. But when his aide whispered into his ear, "It's from Sarah, something urgent," he pushed the speech aside and said one word. Now. The files arrived just after 9 p.m. William asked to be alone. What followed, according to an insider who viewed the surveillance logs, was unprecedented. He remained in his private study until 3:17 a.m. No calls, no lights, just the slow, methodical flipping of pages. And when he emerged, his expression was unreadable. Now here's where things take a turn. The very next morning, Sarah Ferguson's estate was quietly placed under temporary restriction. Not locked down, but carefully managed. No press, no deliveries. Aides were told to pause all non-essential staff movement. No reason given. But the order came directly from the palace. Meanwhile, Sarah herself was unreachable. Recovering from a second round of surgery, she had reportedly been sedated. Visitors were limited. Phone privileges revoked. Even her daughters were kept at a distance. And in the background, William was quietly assembling a team. 3 advisors. 1 legal, 1 historical, 1 personal. Because what he had read in those pages wasn't just emotional. It was dangerous. But let's back up again. The envelope, red wax, silk-wrapped, sealed and resealed, was just the beginning. Inside was a list, typed on Sarah's old stationery. The heading? Subjects I swore never to discuss. The list read like a dossier. Diana's final outburst before her Paris trip. Charles's broken promise during Camilla's first private visit. The Windsor summer where Harry went missing for 6 hours. A dinner where Camilla reportedly told William to get over it. A confrontation between Andrew and a high-ranking foreign official. A letter from Diana Sarah never turned over to the palace. And a confession about herself. But what stood out most? Each subject had a date, a location, and, in some cases, direct quotes. Sarah hadn't just written memories. She wrote evidence, the kind that could be corroborated. And William knew, once he read it, he could never unknow it. Because knowledge, in the royal world, is a curse. You can't speak it, you can't act on it, and you certainly can't erase it. So what did William do? He started asking questions. Discreetly, quietly, calling people from that era. His former nanny, a retired valet, one of his mother's old security officers. And here's the twist. They confirmed it. Almost all of it. In fact, one person added something more. She didn't include the worst part, they told William. The bit about the letter. What letter? The one Diana left behind. The one she never meant for Charles to see. That's when William made a second call. To the royal archivist. And the order? Cross-check every single file we have from Sarah's estate. Page by page. If anything is missing, I want to know who had access. I want names. Because that's when he realized something chilling. The envelope was incomplete. One page, the folded one, was gone. And whoever took it knew exactly what they were doing. Because that page, according to a surviving footnote on the table of contents, wasn't just about the past. It was about now. And that leads us to the most critical moment of all. The moment William made a choice, not as a prince, not as a future monarch, but as a son. Because buried in the final section of Sarah's file was a note. 1 paragraph, handwritten, and it began with this. William, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago, but I couldn't find the words. Diana knew more than she ever said. And so did I, forgive me. That's where the chapter ends. Because what came next is in chapter 2, when William turns the page and comes face to face with Diana's private breakdown, a moment even Sarah once swore she would never talk about. But now, it's all on paper, and it's about to destroy everything he thought he knew about the woman who raised him. What does it look like when a woman as strong, poised, and adored as Princess Diana finally shatters? It doesn't happen in front of cameras. It doesn't happen at a royal banquet or a red carpet event. It happens in private. In silence, behind closed doors, with no one to protect her but someone she barely trusted until that moment. And Sarah Ferguson? She was there. In fact, she was the only one who was. According to the second entry in Sarah's hidden envelope, dated just weeks before Diana's final trip to Paris, the breakdown didn't come from a fight. It didn't come from a scandal. It came from a look. That look came from Charles. And it told Diana everything she needed to know. He was gone. Fully. Emotionally. Strategically. Permanently. Whatever was left of their marriage, or their story, had died. And he was already living as if she'd vanished. But it gets worse. Because what Sarah wrote in that entry isn't just emotional. It's terrifying. She didn't cry at first. The page begins. She stared at me, hands trembling, repeating the same thing. It was all a performance. The entire marriage. I was the final act. I thought I was the lead. Sarah had been called to Kensington Palace unexpectedly. Diana didn't want a royal aide. She didn't want a therapist. She wanted someone who had been broken, publicly humiliated, and shoved aside, just like her. Sarah walked in to find Diana pacing barefoot on the cold stone floor, the fireplace unlit despite the chill. Her eyes were bloodshot, not from tears, from exhaustion. The kind that sits deep in the soul and refuses to let you sleep. And on the table, a letter, half crumpled, signed by Charles. The contents of that letter, according to Sarah, were simple, almost surgical. I regret that we brought each other more pain than peace. I hope you'll find the life you're searching for. No warmth, no apology, just a final full stop. A royal goodbye dressed in civility but soaked in abandonment. Now here's the moment that Sarah described in chilling detail. Diana picked up the letter, looked at me, and said, "This is what they wanted, for me to quietly disappear. But I won't give them that satisfaction." Then she walked over to the mirror and started laughing. Not loud, not hysterical, the kind of laugh that's only half alive. Have you ever seen someone laugh like that? Because it's not joy. It's despair pretending to wear a mask. Sarah knew something was wrong. She tried to comfort her, but Diana pulled away. She collapsed onto the floor, legs tucked beneath her like a child, and whispered something that has never been publicly repeated until now. "If anything happens to me, tell the boys the truth. Don't let them believe I left on purpose." Let that sit with you for a moment. Not, "Tell the boys I love them." Not, "Look after them for me." Tell them the truth. Now ask yourself, what truth was she referring to? That the firm was shutting her out? That Charles had moved on, not just emotionally, but operationally? That Diana no longer had protection? Sarah didn't clarify, but what she did say next is unforgettable. She told me she felt watched, not in a paranoid way, in a resigned way, like she knew her life wasn't fully hers anymore, like the walls had ears and she was being tolerated until she became inconvenient. It wasn't a conspiracy, it was control, and Sarah saw the shift happening in real time. Because the next day, Diana's calendar changed. 2 security staff were rotated out without explanation. She received word that her Paris charity trip would not include full royal protection. Instead, private arrangements would be made. Her calls with William and Harry were limited. Press access was subtly increased. Everything was tightening, and Diana knew it. Sarah wrote, "She hugged me at the door and said, 'One day they'll try to make me look crazy. Don't let them.'" She wasn't crying anymore. She was calm, too calm, like a woman preparing for a final act and hoping someone, anyone, would be brave enough to document it. That's exactly what Sarah did. She documented it. And now William is reading that moment, line by line. Think about how that must feel, to be told that your mother suspected she wouldn't make it out of the palace system alive, that she feared the official version of events would silence the personal truth, that she entrusted her friend, not her ex-husband, not her sister-in-law, not her own family, to be the last witness. And that witness is now gone. The Diana that William remembers. The loving mother, the cheeky smile, the soft voice that read bedtime stories, had a parallel life he never saw. One filled with shadows, whispers, and locked doors. But here's the part that will break your heart. Sarah described one more scene, just days before Diana left for Paris. They were at a small gathering in the countryside. Diana was unusually quiet, not withdrawn, just reflective. She kept checking the time, watching the clock, and then she said this: "I don't know what scares me more, dying or being erased." Sarah didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone who's already accepted that the system they devoted their life to might be plotting to forget them? The next time Sarah saw Diana was at the funeral, and that guilt, it never left her, which is why she wrote it down. All of it. So that William, one day, would understand. That his mother didn't break because she was weak. She broke because she was silenced. But there's one more twist. One that Sarah hinted at, but never explained. In a scribbled footnote on the page, she wrote, "There was another letter. Diana gave it to me that same night. Told me to keep it safe. I hid it, but it went missing years later. I always feared who took it, and why." That's right. Another letter. One that Diana never sent. One that she entrusted to Sarah alone. And one that vanished. Could that be the missing page from the file? Could that be the very reason William reacted with such horror? Or is it something even darker? Because the only clue Sarah left behind was this. The name she wrote at the top of the letter wasn't Charles. She didn't say who it was. But the implication was clear. There's another player. Another figure. Someone Diana feared, or trusted, enough to write a final message to before her death. And that person may still be watching, and may still be protected, which leaves William and us with the cruelest question of all. What was Diana trying to tell us? What did she want her sons to know? And why was Sarah the only one she trusted to carry the truth? The next chapter might hold the answer. Because Charles had regrets too. And according to Sarah, he once whispered something that haunted her ever since. It happened at a cottage. A storm was raging, and Charles had just learned that Diana left behind a letter no one in the royal circle had ever seen. And what he said, might be the closest thing we'll ever get to an admission. What if the man set to inherit the crown never wanted it? Not because he didn't believe in tradition, not because he lacked the grooming or the discipline, but because deep down, behind every royal decree and public wave, he knew the role had already cost him everything. And what if the one person he confessed that to was Sarah Ferguson? Not Camilla, not his sons. Sarah. It was a stormy night in the Scottish Highlands. Birkhall, Charles's private residence, was cloaked in wind and shadow. The kind of night where windows rattle and memories knock louder than any guest. Sarah had been invited up discreetly, not for an event, not for a dinner, just to talk. The invitation was unexpected, delivered by a private courier. Handwritten, no crest, no formal title, just a note that read, "Sarah, I think I owe you something. And I think I owe Diana something too." That alone was enough to make her pause. It had been years since they'd spoken privately. After Diana's death, the royal family entered lockdown mode. Communications were filtered. Walls were erected, not physical ones, but emotional, procedural ones. The kind that isolate the truth, even from those who lived it. But now, Charles was reaching out. So she went. Birkhall was silent when she arrived. No aides, no Camilla. Just Charles, a bottle of scotch, and two worn leather chairs beside a roaring fireplace. And according to Sarah's account in the sealed envelope, what he said that night changed the way she saw everything. He didn't look like a prince that night, Sarah wrote. He looked like a man who'd spent his whole life rehearsing someone else's role. At first, the conversation was surface level. How were the girls? How was the estate? Was she still writing? But then came the pause. The kind of pause that signals a pivot, when a person swallows their pride and starts speaking from somewhere real. Charles leaned back, stared into the fire, and said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd been honest? From the start?" Sarah didn't answer. She let him continue. "I lied to Diana," he said flatly. "Not just about Camilla. That part's easy to condemn. But I lied about who I was, what I felt, what I was capable of. And worse, I let her believe it was all her fault. Let that settle for a moment. The future King of England, admitting in private, not just to betrayal, but to emotional manipulation. He wasn't sobbing. He wasn't crumbling. But there was a weight in his voice that Sarah said she'd never heard before. She deserved better, he murmured. But that wasn't the line that haunted Sarah. It was what came next. "I remember the day we got engaged. She looked at me like I was her whole world. And I looked at her like she was a task. A task. A royal assignment. A merger between bloodlines." Now imagine William reading that line years later. Imagine the psychological whiplash, realizing that the marriage that brought you into this world wasn't a fairy tale, but a strategy. That your mother was sacrificed on the altar of monarchy, and the man who orchestrated it admitted it, years too late, to a woman who was supposed to be an outsider. But it gets deeper. Charles didn't stop there. He told Sarah about the moments he remembered most vividly. Not the wedding, not the kiss on the balcony, but the fights, the silence. The time he found Diana alone in a corridor, crying silently because the palace photographer had told her to stand a little more like a Windsor. The moment he saw William trying to comfort her, no older than 5, and walked away instead of helping. And the worst memory of all. Harry asked me once why Mummy never smiled at dinner. I told him she had a headache. But she didn't. She just couldn't fake it anymore. According to Sarah's notes, Charles poured himself another drink and then whispered, "Do you know what it's like to be feared by your own children?" He said he thought he was protecting them, that by maintaining discipline and distance, he was preparing them for the brutality of royal life. But now, he wasn't so sure. Because here's the part that sent William into silence. Sarah's next paragraph read, "He asked me if he should tell them, William and Harry, about what he did, about what he failed to do. I told him it was his decision. But I also told him this. They already know. The question is, do they understand?" And Charles's response, "William will. Harry never will." That was over 2 decades ago. And today, it's proving truer than ever. But the most painful confession came at the end of that night. Sarah described it as the moment Charles finally broke. He stood up, walked to the window, and said, "Camilla saved me from disappearing. But Diana, she saved the crown. They just never gave her credit for it." And then, silence. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't hug her. He simply turned away. And Sarah left. But before she did, She wrote something curious. In the margin of that page, in faded pencil, she scribbled, "He knows about the letter, but he doesn't know who it was for, and I didn't tell him." Another reference to Diana's final message. Another implication that someone else, someone neither Charles nor William expected, was at the center of Diana's final truth. So now William is left with a tormenting reality. His father isn't the villain he thought, but he's not innocent either. He's a man who made cowardly choices, who watched a woman he once admired unravel under pressure, who stayed silent when a word might have saved her, and who now wants understanding without consequences. But what does William owe him? What does a son owe a father who didn't protect his mother? That's the question William wrestled with after reading that confession. According to a source close to his inner circle, William didn't speak to Charles for 3 days after reviewing the Burke Hall entry. He didn't tell him why. He didn't need to, because Charles knew. The sins of silence echo louder than screams. And now, the file has resurrected every wound the family worked so hard to bury. But Charles wasn't the only man in Diana's life with regrets. There was another. Someone who wasn't royal. Someone who had power behind the curtain. And someone Diana feared might someday be exposed. Sarah called him the mirror. And in Chapter 4, we dive into the one piece of evidence Diana left behind, a tape. A recording meant only for Sarah. Until now. Because William has listened to it. And the name Diana mentions in that tape? It's not Charles. It's not Camilla. It's someone else. And it changes everything. Have you ever heard someone speak from beyond the grave? Not through a medium. Not through some dramatic seance. But through a voice recorded on tape. Still raw. Still trembling. Still full of the emotion they never got to share in public? Because that's exactly what William heard. And once he played it, he couldn't unhear it. It was tucked away at the bottom of the envelope. Not labeled. Not obvious. Wrapped in a fragile silk handkerchief that smelled faintly of lavender and age. A dusty, decades-old cassette tape. One of those tiny micro-cassettes used in personal recorders. The kind Diana carried in her handbag when she felt she had no one left to trust but her own words. And it had no label. Just a piece of masking tape with a single, handwritten phrase. "Only if something happens to me." William stared at it for several minutes before doing anything. No one else was in the room. The courtiers had been dismissed. The doors locked. The fire dimmed. He inserted the tape into a vintage recorder found in the estate files, clicked the play button, and heard his mother's voice for the first time in a way he never had before. Not the polished Diana. Not the people's princess. But a woman terrified. A woman alone. A woman who knew time was running out. The tape begins with breathing. Just breathing. A long inhale. Then Diana speaks, softly, as if afraid someone else might hear her even through the recorder. "If you're hearing this, something has gone terribly wrong. And I need you to know that none of it was an accident." Those are her first words. Now imagine that hitting William, the son she tried so hard to protect, like a hammer to the chest. This was no diary. No reflection. This was a warning. A plea. The voice continued. "I've been followed. For months. My calls are no longer private. My staff are rotated every few weeks. And I've seen unfamiliar faces around Kensington. Men who smile, but never speak. She names no names, not yet. But the anxiety in her tone is undeniable. She mentions the trip to Paris. That it wasn't spontaneous. That it was designed to look spontaneous. That she was encouraged by someone she doesn't identify to use Dodi Al-Fayed's resources because it would make things easier. Then she pauses. There's a shuffle on the tape. A glass of water, perhaps. A deep breath. And then, the sentence that changed everything. "If I die, the world will think it was an accident. But I want my sons to know I was trying to leave. Not run away. Leave. For good. And someone didn't want that to happen." Leave what? Leave the royal family? Leave London? Leave the United Kingdom altogether? Sarah never elaborated. But what she did right in the margin of her transcript, yes, she had transcribed the tape years ago, was this. "Diana told me she was being watched. Not by the press. By them. And under them, she drew a crown." Now let's pause. Because it's easy to get swept up in theories, conspiracies, tabloid nonsense. But this isn't some fringe book. This is Sarah Ferguson documenting what she personally heard, what Diana recorded, and what William is now listening to in complete disbelief. And the most damning moment? It comes near the end. Diana's voice drops to a whisper. And she says, "There's a man. You don't know his name, but he's been part of this institution for longer than Charles has been alive. I call him the mirror, because he always reflects back what the crown wants to see. He never shows the truth. He controls information. He controls fear. The mirror, not a nickname, a code name, someone high-ranking, not a royal, but close enough to control how royals operate. Possibly a senior private secretary. Possibly someone inside MI5 with royal clearance. Maybe even someone who controlled security details and travel plans." Diana continues, "He once told me, 'Your power is your image. If you ever lose control of it, we will reclaim it for you.'" I didn't understand what he meant. I do now. William reportedly paused the tape at this point. Not because he was done, but because he couldn't breathe. Think about that. Hearing your mother say, in her own words, that she feared for her life, and that a shadowy figure within the institution your entire identity is tied to may have engineered her downfall. Not because she was wrong, but because she was inconvenient. Sarah wrote that she first heard the tape weeks after Diana's death. Diana had sent it in a package labeled "For Sarah's Eyes Only," via a trusted friend, someone connected to the Spencer family. It arrived with a letter that simply said, "If I'm gone, please keep this safe. Not for the press. For William. When he's ready." But Sarah wasn't ready. She didn't tell anyone about the tape. Not even her daughters. She feared it would be dismissed. That she'd be accused of exploiting Diana's memory again. So she hid it. For years. Until the night she feared her cancer diagnosis might end her own life. That's when she wrote everything down. Everything she'd witnessed. Everything she'd heard. Everything Diana entrusted to her. So that one day, the truth wouldn't just live in whispers. It would have a voice. And now it does. But here's the most chilling part of the tape. Diana's final message. You can hear her crying now. Not sobbing. Crying quietly. Like someone who's wept so much they've run out of energy. And she says, in the softest voice imaginable, "William, Harry, I love you more than you'll ever know. And I'm sorry that I wasn't strong enough to stop what's coming. But maybe one day, you will be." Click. That's how it ends. No dramatic fade. No final revelation. Just a click. And the silence of a woman who saw what others refused to see and paid the price. So what does William do now? He's heard the tape. He's read Sarah's transcript. He's seen the names. He's seen the pattern. He knows now that his mother didn't just feel paranoid. She was being watched. And whoever the mirror is may still be pulling strings. Sources say William immediately ordered an internal review of past royal security protocols. Old travel logs. Diana's calendar entries from 1996 to 1997. He also instructed a tech team to analyze the tape for voice authentication. The results? Authentic. 100%. That is Princess Diana's voice. But more disturbing, the background noise on the tape suggests it wasn't recorded in Kensington Palace. It was recorded in a hotel room. Alone. With the curtains drawn. Which begs the question, did Diana already know she had been pushed out? Was the Paris trip her final attempt to escape? And was the crash a horrible coincidence? Or part of a larger pattern of calculated silence? William doesn't have those answers. Not yet. But what he does have now, thanks to Sarah, is clarity. Clarity that his mother wasn't irrational. She wasn't hysterical. She was right. And she tried, in the only way she could, to protect her sons. Not with headlines. Not with interviews. But with the truth. And that tape? It's only one of two. Because according to a note Sarah left in the envelope, there's a second recording. One made just days before Diana's death. One she allegedly gave to someone she trusted even more than Sarah. And that person might be the key to everything. In Chapter 5, we finally dive into the royal childhood that was never captured in photos. The secrets William and Harry were never told. And the one conversation between Charles and a palace aide that nearly exposed the truth about their mother's final decision. What was Diana planning? Why did she keep it from her sons? And who tried to stop her? What if your entire childhood, the laughs, the tears, the bedtime stories, had a second version? One you never saw. One that was carefully edited, scripted, and framed for your protection. And what if the truth, the real truth, had been sitting in someone's drawer for decades, waiting to blow it all wide open? Because that's exactly what William's facing now. And the secret? It starts with a photograph. Sarah included it in the envelope. tucked inside a folded sheet, almost as an afterthought. Faded and curling at the edges, it showed two young boys playing in a garden. William, barefoot, mid-laugh. Harry, tumbling behind him, cheeks flushed with joy. Diana stood a few feet away, reaching toward them with a grin that could melt anyone. A single snapshot. Innocent. Happy. But written on the back, in Sarah's unmistakable handwriting, were 5 chilling words. This was the last real day. The last real day? William stared at the photo for hours, according to an aide, because he remembered that day. Vaguely. A blur of sunshine and lemonade. But nothing special. Nothing final. So why did Sarah frame it like an ending? Her notes explained it all. It had been just after a particularly brutal meeting between Diana and Charles. A confrontation behind closed doors. Raised voices. A slammed door. And an order issued by a senior royal advisor. No more unsupervised access. Diana's becoming unstable. That's when everything changed. Sarah wrote. They didn't tell the boys. Of course not. They were too young. But suddenly, their world became different. More structured. More filtered. Staff were briefed not to mention certain things. Conversations were monitored. Even the bedtime stories started to shift, away from fairy tales and toward palace protocol. That single decision, to frame Diana as unstable, set off a chain reaction. William and Harry were no longer just the beloved sons of a troubled marriage. They were future symbols, assets to be molded. And Diana? She was quietly being erased. Sarah documented moments that will make your stomach turn. Like the time William ran into the kitchen asking for the apple juice Mummy gives me, only to be told by a butler, that's not allowed anymore. Or the Christmas where Harry drew a picture of Diana with a crown, only to have it replaced in the hallway with a sanitized version, featuring the Queen instead. Or, perhaps most heartbreaking of all, the moment William asked why Mummy didn't eat dinner with them anymore, and was told, she's too busy helping people. She'll be back soon. She wasn't. She was being isolated. Not by choice, but by protocol, by image management, and by a system that had already chosen sides. Now here's where the story twists even deeper. Sarah wrote about a specific moment, one that still haunted her. It was a rainy Sunday. The boys were with Charles at Highgrove. Diana had begged for one evening alone with them. Just dinner. Just the 3 of them. The palace said no. Officially, due to security inconsistencies. Unofficially, because Diana had recently spoken to a journalist, and the firm feared what she might say in front of the children. Sarah witnessed the aftermath. Diana called her, furious, devastated, and shaking. They're treating me like I'm a threat to my own sons, she sobbed. They've turned them into pawns, and I can't reach them anymore. Sarah visited the next morning, and that's when Diana handed her a small red notebook. Not for publication, not for interviews, for William and Harry. If I'm gone, she said, give them this when they're old enough to see the truth, when they start asking the wrong questions. Sarah kept that notebook for years. Eventually, she typed up the contents and included excerpts in the sealed envelope. And those excerpts? They are devastating. Diana wrote letters to her boys, not just as a mother, but as a woman terrified she wouldn't be around to explain what really happened. To William, she wrote, you were always so serious, so thoughtful. Even at 5, you wanted to fix things. You wanted to understand why Mummy cried sometimes. I saw you watching me. I hope you never feel like it was your fault. It never was. You were my light. To Harry, you were the joy, the mischief, the spark. You made me laugh when no one else could. I worry for you, because you see everything, but you don't always have the words. One day, I hope you find them. But perhaps the most telling entry was dated just weeks before her death. I think I'm losing them. Not in love. Never that. But in influence. The crown is too strong. The palace is too skilled. They've found ways to make me the villain. Not overtly. Quietly. Through routine. Through separation. Through whispers. William, reading that now, as a father himself, must feel a pain most of us can't comprehend. To realize that while you thought your mother simply faded out of your childhood at times, she was actually being removed. Deliberately. Carefully. To shape you. To protect the institution from her. And if you think that was the worst of it, you're wrong. Sarah's documents also included testimony from a former palace aide, anonymized, but their story was clear. They overheard a conversation between Charles and a senior advisor. Diana had requested to take the boys on a short trip abroad, just the three of them. The advisor warned against it. It would risk inconsistency in messaging, they said. If she controls the narrative too much, we lose leverage. Charles reportedly said nothing for a long moment, then replied, "Do what you have to." That was the final decision. Trip denied. Narrative controlled. Leverage secured. William and Harry never even knew it was a possibility. And Diana? She never asked again. Now here's where it all comes together. Sarah's writings end this section with one line that cuts like a blade. They thought keeping the truth from the boys would protect them, but it only made the damage quieter and deeper. So what does William do with that now? He's a grown man, a father, a future king. He can't change the past. He can't resurrect the moments stolen from him and Harry. But he can do one thing. He can confront it. Sources say he's begun speaking with select former palace staff, people who were there during those years. People who remember the rotation orders, the security changes, the sudden silences. He's asking questions no one expected. And his aides? They're nervous. Because the more he uncovers, the more dangerous it becomes. Not just to the memory of his parents, but to the very structure he's been sworn to protect. And now, there's one name that keeps appearing in the background of Sarah's notes. A woman. Not royal. Not noble. But pivotal. A figure who stood beside Diana in her darkest hours, and who may have received the second tape Diana recorded before her death. In Chapter 6, we finally reveal the comment Camilla made to young William that forever fractured their relationship. The moment that shattered the fragile balance between stepmother and son. And why that moment is directly tied to the missing page and the name no one wants spoken aloud. What if the secret that could upend the British royal family wasn't lost to time, but hidden in plain sight, behind a wooden panel and a rusted lock, untouched for nearly 2 decades? It all began with a sound. Not a scream, not a royal outburst, just a faint, almost imperceptible click. A warped floorboard, a dusty drawer, the hesitant creak of hinges opening for the first time in years. The kind of sound you only notice when the world is otherwise silent. And on that quiet afternoon in the Yorkshire countryside, within the aging corridors of Sarah Ferguson's private estate, a housekeeper named Margaret heard it. She hadn't meant to stumble upon it. She was simply doing what she'd done for over 30 years, tidying up before the Duchess's return, folding linens, dusting the bookshelves, checking the old study where the late Queen once sent handwritten letters addressed simply to Sarah. That room hadn't been used in a while. The Duchess had recently undergone major surgery. She was recovering, mostly in London, so the estate staff had strict instructions: preserve the place, keep it as is. But the old wooden cabinet in the corner had developed a sticky drawer. One of its legs wobbled. Margaret, being meticulous, decided to investigate. She tugged, gently, then again, harder. Suddenly, a thud. A hollow one, different from what wood on wood should sound like. She tapped. The bottom panel echoed. A false bottom. She reached for a small screwdriver, wedged it under the seam, lifted. That's when she saw it. A silk scarf, neatly folded. Burgundy and gold, the Duchess of York's favorite colors, wrapped tightly around a bundle. As she unwrapped it, her heart thudded. Not from fear, but from something else. Anticipation. Inside was an envelope, heavy, sealed with red wax. The cursive on the front, hauntingly elegant, read, "Things I will never speak about." She froze. Should she put it back? Call a supervisor? She did neither. Instead, she slipped it quietly into the satchel of documents scheduled to be sent to the archival consultant later that day, a team brought in by the palace to digitize old correspondence. Officially, this was a heritage project. Privately, it was about control. Anything that could be a liability had to be reviewed. Margaret didn't know it yet, but her decision would ignite a storm. The bundle arrived at the London Archive Lab 3 hours later. 2 experts, Dr. Neville Simmons and his assistant Clive, began sorting the files. Most were harmless. Old birthday cards from Beatrice and Eugenie. Letters from Diana thanking Sarah for support. A charming note from Prince Philip poking fun at her insatiable optimism. But then, they found the envelope. At first, they assumed it was personal, private, something to be filed away, until Clive turned it over. On the back was a second inscription, scribbled in rushed ink. "If something happens to me, give this to William." Only William. Now pause. Take that in. This wasn't addressed to the Queen. Not to Charles. Not to Anne, the royal family's enforcer. Not even to her own daughters. Sarah Ferguson, often dismissed as the scandal-ridden Duchess, the outsider, the one who wasn't royal enough, had written a personal confession meant for one man, the future king. Why? That's exactly what Clive asked. But Dr. Simmons said something stranger. We're not the first ones to see this. What do you mean? Clive asked. The wax seal, it's cracked. Someone's already opened it. And resealed it. Now that changed everything. Within the hour, the archive team had flagged the file as ultra-sensitive. In royal speak, that meant code red. 2 palace couriers, in unmarked cars, were dispatched to retrieve the documents and deliver them directly to Kensington Palace. William was at Clarence House when he got the call. According to sources, he was reviewing a speech for an upcoming mental health initiative. But when his aide whispered into his ear, "It's from Sarah, something urgent," he pushed the speech aside and said one word. Now. The files arrived just after 9 p.m. William asked to be alone. What followed, according to an insider who viewed the surveillance logs, was unprecedented. He remained in his private study until 3:17 a.m. No calls, no lights, just the slow, methodical flipping of pages. And when he emerged, his expression was unreadable. Now here's where things take a turn. The very next morning, Sarah Ferguson's estate was quietly placed under temporary restriction. Not locked down, but carefully managed. No press, no deliveries. Aides were told to pause all non-essential staff movement. No reason given. But the order came directly from the palace. Meanwhile, Sarah herself was unreachable. Recovering from a second round of surgery, she had reportedly been sedated. Visitors were limited. Phone privileges revoked. Even her daughters were kept at a distance. And in the background, William was quietly assembling a team. 3 advisors. 1 legal, 1 historical, 1 personal. Because what he had read in those pages wasn't just emotional. It was dangerous. But let's back up again. The envelope, red wax, silk-wrapped, sealed and resealed, was just the beginning. Inside was a list, typed on Sarah's old stationery. The heading? Subjects I swore never to discuss. The list read like a dossier. Diana's final outburst before her Paris trip. Charles's broken promise during Camilla's first private visit. The Windsor summer where Harry went missing for 6 hours. A dinner where Camilla reportedly told William to get over it. A confrontation between Andrew and a high-ranking foreign official. A letter from Diana Sarah never turned over to the palace. And a confession about herself. But what stood out most? Each subject had a date, a location, and, in some cases, direct quotes. Sarah hadn't just written memories. She wrote evidence, the kind that could be corroborated. And William knew, once he read it, he could never unknow it. Because knowledge, in the royal world, is a curse. You can't speak it, you can't act on it, and you certainly can't erase it. So what did William do? He started asking questions. Discreetly, quietly, calling people from that era. His former nanny, a retired valet, one of his mother's old security officers. And here's the twist. They confirmed it. Almost all of it. In fact, one person added something more. She didn't include the worst part, they told William. The bit about the letter. What letter? The one Diana left behind. The one she never meant for Charles to see. That's when William made a second call. To the royal archivist. And the order? Cross-check every single file we have from Sarah's estate. Page by page. If anything is missing, I want to know who had access. I want names. Because that's when he realized something chilling. The envelope was incomplete. One page, the folded one, was gone. And whoever took it knew exactly what they were doing. Because that page, according to a surviving footnote on the table of contents, wasn't just about the past. It was about now. And that leads us to the most critical moment of all. The moment William made a choice, not as a prince, not as a future monarch, but as a son. Because buried in the final section of Sarah's file was a note. One paragraph, handwritten, and it began with this. William, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago, but I couldn't find the words. Diana knew more than she ever said. And so did I, forgive me. That's where the chapter ends. Because what came next is in chapter 2, when William turns the page and comes face to face with Diana's private breakdown. A moment even Sarah once swore she would never talk about. But now, it's all on paper. And it's about to destroy everything he thought he knew about the woman who raised him. What does it look like when a woman as strong, poised, and adored as Princess Diana finally shatters? It doesn't happen in front of cameras. It doesn't happen at a royal banquet or a red carpet event. It happens in private. In silence, behind closed doors, with no one to protect her but someone she barely trusted.